Hello and welcome to the Experiencing Fatigue public engagement panel discussion. I'll start off with some background to the project. Now, I am a scientist who is interested in understanding how the brain contributes to development of fatigue in the long term after stroke. Now, this was something that I was interested in immediately after finishing my PhD, and I started thinking about ways of addressing this question. So the first thing I looked into was, how do we measure fatigue? And the obvious answer was questionnaires. So you give either 10 to 15 questions, or depending on what questionnaire we use, it's either short or long, and we get information from the stroke survivors about their fatigue levels. And I thought, hey, we have got a good tool for measuring fatigue. And slowly, over the last 8 years, I have come to realize that the fatigue questionnaires, although extremely useful in getting an overall picture of the levels of fatigue, it doesn't give you the full picture in relation to the experience of fatigue. How do patients actually experience the symptom? It's not simply a question of tiredness. There are lots of other elements to it. Specifically, sensory processing seems to be altered quite significantly. Now, this is not necessarily captured in all of the questionnaires that we use. And I set about thinking, how do we understand this experience of fatigue? Now, why do we need to understand it? The critical thing is, unless we get a full picture of the experience, we are not going to be able to pin down what it is that the brain is doing to contribute to these experiences. Now, that's when I thought, questionnaires are, although extremely useful, are not serving the purpose for what I am interested in, which is to understand the underlying mechanisms of fatigue. I need to learn more about experience. How do we go about doing this? And this is when, at this point in time, I attended a UK Stroke Forum day, which was organized by Cassie Hugel. And that's when I thought, I need to start interacting with patients more exclusively just for the purpose of understanding the experience, as opposed to just bringing them in to do experiments. And that's where the arts project was born. And of course, I'm very grateful to Cassie, who has helped me put this whole idea together and obtain funding from the Wellcome Trust for this project. And once the project was funded, of course, the entire team has chipped in. Importantly, William and Sean and Sophie are artists. So this is a hugely collaborative work, and I'm very excited about the outcome of this project and looking forward to taking it to the next level. Hopefully now we will hear from Sophie about her experience, and then you'll get an opportunity to ask her some questions about more about this project.
Working on the Experiencing Fatigue project with post-stroke survivors has been an extraordinary experience and an amazing privilege as an artist. Our process started back in March, and I did one face-to-face workshop with a group of 5 participants who were incredibly generous and began to illuminate what the reality of fatigue was for them. Over the coming sort of 3 to 4 months, we had to convert everything to online workshops where we worked with narratives. I sent out packs of metal embossings with tools, and I also sent out embroidery to certain individuals. And the idea behind the project was very much to explore metaphors and begin to get an insight into what the reality of living with fatigue is like. The experience that post-stroke survivors have of fatigue is something that is incredibly visceral and very, is quite shocking. To imagine somebody, one of the participants said to me, I get up in the morning, I have a shower, I get dressed, and I have to go back to bed. And the idea that what for most of us is the start of our day and something that wakes us up and punctuates our day is in itself an enormous chore, began to give me an insight into what this very difficult condition is. I sent out embossing kits. Embossing is done on an aluminium sheet, and people were encouraged to emboss elements of a brain, and also some people sent back embroideries. What was lovely was this process of exchange that went on, where I would send something out by post and it would come back. And obviously during COVID we had to be very careful about how we monitored infection and allowed sort of time for a sort of quarantine to happen with the materials. And in the meantime, we were also working on narratives, and some of the narratives that emerged through the workshops and through the writing are things like: fatigue is a molten quagmire, slowly creeping at a distance, constant, unstoppable rumble. Fatigue is an incessant throb felt in your chest and through every fibre of your being. Fatigue is an uninvited guest, a demanding visitor, a merciless parasite, a dark looming presence. Fatigue, a sparrowhawk appearing from nowhere, swooping down, grabbing its prey, and leaving a wake of devastation and trauma. What I've done with the narratives that were collected is that I've assembled them into a series of 3 artwork panels that combine the embossings and the participative elements that were created haptically, along with the metaphorical written and spoken narratives, to create a piece that can then be reflected on at a later date. The artworks are created using an embossing process, which is an aluminium metal, which I've printed onto, and then it's combined with the metaphors that emerged from the writing workshops that we did online, exploring metaphors. And this has always also been the starting point for the animation and some of the ideas that go into the soundscape and things that are developing as part of the project. So one participant said that if fatigue was an animal, it would be a sparrowhawk appearing from nowhere, swooping down, grabbing its prey, leaving a wake of devastation and trauma. Fatigue is insect-like, a colony of ants, a swarm of locusts, clouds of blackness appearing from nowhere, overwhelming, devastating. Colour is in the mind, crespicado, dusk grey, twilight, powder pink, fragile dawn. If fatigue was an animal, it would be a hippo, lumbering, slow, lethal, crushing you within its jaws.